Hello, beautiful. Welcome. When I created my new painting series, Backwards Beauty, I pulled ideas from all corners of my mind and personality to create images that spoke to my heart. It's important that I connect to each of these images because I wanted to be inspired and excited to paint them. I think when I paint from that space, the end result is so much better. The portrait today was inspired by the fact that I love cats. Having owned and lived with cats for years only increased my love and fascination for them. In fact, I am a lion. I was born in August, and my zodiac sign is Leo. I wanted this beauty to have long, wavy blonde hair in the same tones as the baby lion because I wanted them to harmonize together. I was super nervous about this painting because I knew the hair would make or break this painting. I think one part of painting should always scare you a bit. In my mind, that means you have something to learn from the painting. So I was determined to take my time and learn what I needed to learn. So I thought I would share with you some of my tips I've learned while painting this portrait of the blonde and the baby lion. So tip number 1, fast drying base layer. This is something I just started to do. I'm using acrylic paint for the base layer. I find that it helps me to get a feel for the colors and values that I want to use. Because they are fast drying, I can easily cover them up if I get either of these wrong. I always want to strive to put down the right colors and values, but this takes some pressure off and makes the layer a bit more fun. On this base layer, I used a neon pink ink on the background. The purpose of this was to bring a little whimsy, but also some unifying to the painting. At the end, you won't be able to see but small bits of the pink showing through. For this base color, I've mixed some ochre, yellow ochre, titanium white, and a touch of sepia. If you don't have sepia, burnt umber would work great. This is going to lay the foundation for both the blonde and the lion's golden fur. At this stage, I'm keeping the strokes loose and I follow the flow of the hair and the fur. Blonde hair especially needs variation in tone to look natural. Tip number 2, pre-mix your colors. I don't always do this for a painting, but I never regret it when I do it. Taking your time to really look at the colors you see and mixing them to match sets you up for success. Pre-mixing my paint colors beforehand helps me to focus better when it comes to placing the color on the canvas. The only thing I need to do is adjust them to be either cooler or warmer in tone, or a little darker or a little lighter in value. The main colors I'll be pulling from are titanium white, cadmium yellow, yellow ochre, sepia, and to warm things up, I will be using cadmium red And to cool things down, I will be using ultramarine blue. Tip number 3, a thin second layer, building dimension. At this stage, I'm going in with my oil paints, but I'm keeping the layers of paint thin. I want to build upon the block in and with layers of rich tones for the shadows and some middle tones to soften them. After this, I will let these layers dry a day or two before I start with the next layer. And that brings us to tip 4, glazing for highlights and shadows. Glazes are thin, transparent layers of paint that allow the colors underneath to shine through, giving the hair more depth and life. I'm using a mixture of titanium white and a bit of cadmium yellow for the highlights, while for the shadows, I'm glazing with a mixture of burnt sienna and a touch of ultramarine blue. The key to making blonde hair look realistic is to keep the highlights and shadows soft and subtle. I let this layer dry before going in with our next layer. And that's tip number 5, creating texture. Now that we've built up our highlight and shadows with glazes, I'm switching to a smaller brush to add some more detail, strands, and texture. For the blonde hair, it's important to paint in the direction of the natural flow. I'm following the curve of the hair and lightly layering in individual strands. The same technique applies for the lion's fur. Even though it's shorter, the layering of thin glazes combined with textured brushstrokes creates a sense of softness and movement. This approach works for both the animal and human hair, building up in layers to give it life and depth. Tip number 6, blending for softness. After adding these detailed strands, I like to go back and soften and blend certain areas. This keeps the hair from looking too harsh or over-detailed. For blending, I use a clean, dry brush and gently feather the edges where the highlights and shadows meet. This is where the hair really starts to take on the soft, natural look. The blending and glazing of layers creates a subtle gradation from light to shadow, giving the hair more realism. The same goes for the lion's fur. You want the soft, fluffy look to feel believable. So you blend those edges. That's the key. Tip number 7, final touches. Now that we've built up several layers of glazes and added a finer detail, I'm going in with a few last touches, adding highlights where the light hits the hair most. Blonde hair reflects a lot of light, so these final highlights are what give it its luminosity. So that's it for today's painting session. The techniques I've shared today, starting with the fast-drying block-in base, then the thin second layer, adding glazes, and then texture and blending for softness, can all be used for any type of hair, whether it's human or animal. Before you go, I'd love to hear in the comments section if you learned something new or you have a tip for me. And until then, here's a preview of next week's video. made a gift for you, and you can find it on my website, janlakey.com. It's a video with my top 5 tips for creating AI reference art. I've learned a lot through this process, and I think this video will help anybody who's just getting started using AI, or somebody who's already using AI and having trouble getting the results that they want. So go on over to my website and get your free gift.